The small neighborhood restaurant was unusually quiet that afternoon. Soft music played in the background as a few regular customers sat scattered across the room. When the front door opened, no one expected the man who walked in to draw so much silent attention. Steven Seagal entered alone. He wore dark clothes, moved slowly, and kept his eyes low. There was no entourage. No announcement. Just a calm, unreadable presence. He chose a corner table near the window and sat down without a word. Behind the counter, a tired-looking waitress took a deep breath before grabbing a menu. She was a single mother, working a double shift to cover rent and school supplies for her young child. Her feet ached, her smile felt practiced, but her professionalism never slipped. She approached Steven's table politely. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome." Steven glanced up briefly and nodded. "Water. No ice." That was it. No smile. No small talk. No friendliness. The waitress wrote it down and forced a gentle smile. She'd seen this type before, quiet customers who made you feel invisible. Still, she reminded herself that good service mattered, no matter what. As the meal went on, Steven spoke very little. He ordered simply, ate slowly, and never once looked at his phone. The waitress checked on him regularly, refilled his water, cleared plates, and made sure everything was perfect. But Steven's expression never changed. From the corner of her eye, she noticed other staff whispering. "He looks rude. Bet he's not tipping. Why do those quiet ones always cause problems?" She ignored them. Tips mattered, especially today. Her child needed new shoes, and payday was still days away. When Steven finished, he stood up, placed the receipt neatly on the table, and walked toward the door without saying a word. The waitress waited a moment, then went to check the receipt. Her heart sank. Tip, $0. At least, that's what it looked like. What she didn't know, what no one in the restaurant knew, was that Steven Seagal had left something behind that would change her life forever. For a few seconds, the waitress just stood there, staring at the receipt. $0 tip. Her chest tightened, not from anger, but from disappointment. She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it into her apron, forcing herself to breathe normally. This wasn't the first time it had happened, she told herself. Still, today it hurt more than usual. She replayed the shift in her head. Was I too slow? Did I forget something? Was my smile not enough? Around her, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Plates clinked, the coffee machine hissed, and customers talked quietly. But at the staff station, whispers began again. "Figures," one server muttered. "Didn't even say thank you," another added. "People like that never tip." The waitress stayed silent. She didn't defend Steven. She didn't complain either. She simply picked up the bill tray and walked back to the table to start cleaning. As she wiped the table, her thoughts drifted to home. Her son would be waiting, probably pretending not to notice that his shoes were worn out. She had promised him she'd try to fix things soon. A decent tip today would have helped, more than anyone knew. She stacked the plates carefully, her movements slow and tired. The empty chair across from her felt heavier than it should have. A customer nearby shook his head. Some people have no respect for hard work. She nodded politely, but said nothing. Complaining wouldn't change the numbers at the bottom of the receipt. In her mind, Steven Seagal had already been judged, quiet, cold, and careless. Just another customer who walked away without thinking about the person serving him. She picked up the plate last, ready to move on to the next table. But something made her pause. The plate felt heavier than expected. She frowned slightly, adjusting her grip. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her. Still, she turned the plate over slowly, curiosity creeping in. Her heart skipped. Something was underneath. She swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of what she was about to find, still believing the worst, yet hoping, just a little, that she might be wrong. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? And tell us, what country and city are you watching from? For a moment, the waitress froze. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the plate as her eyes stayed locked on what she thought she saw underneath. She didn't lift it yet. Instead, she took a slow breath, trying not to let hope fool her again. Don't expect anything, she told herself. You've already seen the receipt. She carefully set the plate down on the counter behind the service station, away from curious eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, not from excitement, but from the emotional weight of the day finally catching up to her. Another waitress glanced over. You okay? Yeah, she replied quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired. Inside, though, her thoughts were loud. The disappointment of the zero tip kept replaying in her mind. She felt embarrassed for even hoping Steven might have been different. Customers like him always left the same lesson behind: never expect kindness. She thought of her son again, how he pretended to be brave when things were hard, how he never complained. The guilt pressed down on her chest. She worked so hard, yet it never seemed to be enough. Around her, staff continued their work, already moving on from Steven's table. To them, the story was finished. But for her, it wasn't. She glanced back at the plate, then slowly lifted it. Her breath caught. There was something folded neatly beneath it, too deliberate to be trash. Her heart began to pound, fear and confusion mixing together. She hesitated, worried this might just be a cruel misunderstanding. What if it was nothing? What if she embarrassed herself for hoping? She looked around once more, then carefully reached down and picked it up. It wasn't a receipt. It wasn't trash. It was a folded note, thick, heavier than paper should be. Her eyes widened. At that exact moment, everything she thought she knew about Steven Seagal began to crack. Engagement break. If this happened to you, would you expect the worst, or hope for a surprise? Comment hope if you'd keep believing. The waitress stared at the folded note in her hand, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The paper felt thicker than any note she had ever touched. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, afraid to open it, as if unfolding it might shatter the fragile calm she was holding onto. She glanced toward the front door. Steven Seagal was gone. Slowly, she slid her thumb under the fold and opened the paper. Her eyes dropped to the first line. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But it felt deeply personal. Thank you for your kindness today. Her throat tightened. She read the next line, and her hands began to shake. I saw how hard you were working. I know what it's like to struggle quietly. The words felt too specific to be random. Too thoughtful to be an afterthought. She swallowed hard, reading on. Some help is meant to be private. Respect matters more than attention. Her vision blurred. She hadn't told him anything about her life. She hadn't complained. She hadn't asked for sympathy. And yet, somehow, he had seen her. She unfolded the note completely. That's when she realized why it felt so heavy. Tucked inside the paper was a thick stack of cash, far more than any tip she had ever received in her life. Her breath caught, and she instinctively covered her mouth, afraid she might cry out loud. A coworker noticed her frozen expression. What is it? She couldn't speak. She just handed over the note with shaking hands. The coworker's eyes widened. Oh my. Another staff member leaned in. Then another. Within seconds, a small circle formed around her, all staring in disbelief. He left this, someone whispered. She nodded slowly, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. The zero on the receipt suddenly made sense. Steven hadn't been careless. He hadn't been cold. He hadn't been cheap. He had been quiet on purpose. And in that silence, he had changed everything. The manager was called over immediately. What's going on? He asked, sensing the tension as the staff stood clustered together. The waitress handed him the note with trembling hands. He read it once. Then again, slower this time. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. This is real, he asked quietly. She nodded. It was under the plate. He carefully unfolded the note further and revealed the full amount of cash. A soft gasp moved through the group. It was more than a generous tip, it was life-changing. Enough to cover overdue bills. Enough to breathe again. The manager looked around the room. Did anyone see him leave this? No, another server said. He didn't want attention. That realization hit them all at once. Steven Seagal hadn't made a show of it. He hadn't waited for gratitude. He hadn't even left his name on the receipt. He walked out knowing his message would be found later, privately. The waitress sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Tears streamed freely now. I thought he didn't care, she whispered. I thought I did something wrong. The manager shook his head. You did everything right. She clutched the note again, reading the words once more. This time, they felt heavier than the money itself. I know what it's like to be judged, the note ended. Don't let one bad moment define your worth. The staff fell silent. Moments earlier, they had mocked Steven for leaving nothing. Now, shame replaced their judgment. One server murmured, we were so wrong about him. The waitress wiped her tears and stood up slowly. Her exhaustion hadn't vanished, but something else had replaced it. Hope. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. Steven Seagal hadn't just left money behind. He had left dignity. understanding, and a reminder that the quietest people often carry the biggest hearts. And the most powerful kindness is the one no one sees. Word spread through the restaurant quickly. Customers who were still seated began whispering as staff moved from table to table, their expressions no longer annoyed but stunned. Someone asked what had happened, and the manager quietly explained that a customer had left something extraordinary behind. No name at first. Just the story. But one man near the counter leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. Wait, was that Steven Seagal? The waitress looked up, surprised. You know him? The man nodded slowly. I recognized him when he walked in. I didn't want to bother him. He's known for staying low-key. Murmurs rippled through the room. That was him. The actor? No way. The waitress felt her chest tighten again, but this time, not from disappointment. From understanding. Steven hadn't acted distant because he was rude. He had been private. Observant. Intentional. Another customer spoke up. He does things like that. Quietly helps people. No cameras. The manager exhaled deeply. That explains everything. The waitress stared at the folded note once more. Now the words carried even deeper meaning. This wasn't a publicity stunt. There were no photos. No social posts. No applause. Just a man who saw someone struggling, and chose kindness without conditions. Someone asked softly, should we post this online? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. He didn't do it to be famous. The room went silent in agreement. If you believe true kindness doesn't need an audience, type respect in the comments. The waitress carefully placed the note back into her apron. She felt lighter, not because of the money alone, but because her faith in people had been restored. Steven Seagal had walked out of the restaurant unnoticed. But his quiet act would stay with her for the rest of her life. That night, the waitress didn't rush home like she usually did. She sat in her car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the folded note on the passenger seat. The glow from the streetlight illuminated the words that had already changed her life. When she finally got home, her son ran to the door like always. She hugged him tighter than usual. For the first time in months, her smile wasn't forced. Over the next few days, the impact of Steven Seagal's quiet generosity began to settle in. Bills that had been stacked on the kitchen table were paid. The overdue notice on the fridge came down. Her son got the new shoes he needed, no arguments, no waiting for next month. But the money wasn't the biggest change. The biggest change was what she carried inside. She walked into work differently now. Not louder. Not entitled. Just steadier. She remembered Steven's words, don't let one bad moment define your worth. Those words stayed with her during long shifts, rude customers, and quiet afternoons. The story didn't stay inside the restaurant forever. One of the customers who had overheard the staff talking shared the experience online, without exaggeration, without drama. Just the truth. The post didn't attack anyone. It didn't even praise Steven loudly. It simply reminded people not to judge too quickly. Within days, it spread. Thousands of comments poured in from people who had once been servers themselves, single parents, or just people who had been misunderstood. This restored my faith in humanity. I was judged once too. Quiet kindness is the strongest kind. Steven Seagal never responded publicly. No interviews. No statements. No reposts. That silence spoke louder than words. At the restaurant, the staff changed too. They stopped whispering about customers. They treated quiet diners with more patience. They learned that you never know what someone carries, or what they might leave behind. One afternoon, the waitress framed the note and placed it on her shelf at home, not to show off the money, but to remember the message. Years later, she would tell her son this story. Not as a tale about a celebrity, but as a lesson. Never judge someone by what you see first, she would say. And never underestimate the power of quiet kindness. Steven Seagal walked in as just another customer. He walked out unseen. But what he left behind changed a life, and reminded everyone that the greatest generosity doesn't ask to be noticed. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us to see people before judging them.